Hello and welcome to Smaulgld.com. China to sell dollar bonds worth $2 billion this week. This is a story we had reported on a couple of weeks ago. China will issue its first dollar-denominated sovereign bonds on October 26th. First Chinese dollar-denominated bonds in 13 years. Now, while the alternative financial media is focused on fantasies of a gold-backed yuan and the end of the petrodollar, China is issuing a dollar-denominated bond and adding U.S. treasuries to her reserves. So here's the headline, and this comes from a source and has a person cited. It says China to sell first dollar bond in 13 years. This is a story out of Hong Kong. China will issue $2 billion worth of dollar-denominated sovereign bonds on Thursday, China's Ministry of Finance said here on Wednesday. And if we go over to china.org, we have the same story. China will issue $2 billion worth of dollar-denominated sovereign bonds on Thursday, Chinese finance minister. China will issue the sovereign bonds in the Hong Kong Special Administrative Region, including $1 billion of 5-year bonds and $1 billion of 10-year bonds, according to a roadshow held here. And there's a guy named here, Wang Yi, Director of Finance, Department of Ministry of Finance. Now, he does mention, this is an important point, that China has very little foreign sovereign debt, and with it now it is $18.1 billion, which is very little, which is only 1.06, they say, of its national debt. As we've talked about in the past, most of China's debt is just internal debt that they owe to itself for buying real estate and other things within the country. Now, compare this story, which is an actual story with an actual source, with an actual bond issuance, to the Nikkei Asian Review, which has set the alternative financial media into a frenzy of fake news. China sees new world order with oil benchmark backed by gold. And then the story comes out of Indonesia. Doesn't cite a Chinese official. China is expected shortly to launch a crude oil futures contract priced in yuan and convertible into gold, and what analysts say could be game changer for the industry. Expected shortly, doesn't say who expects it, just says it's going to be a game changer. Well, that story has morphed so many times. I've reported on it. You can follow it on Smaulgld.com. You can look in the Smaulgld YouTube channel, VidMe channel. I've refuted these stories as being baseless, sourceless. The story keeps changing. And now they're saying that Saudi Arabia is going to be forced or compelled by China to accept yuan. Now they're saying that this is a huge story, the petro-yuan. They're also talking about how it's a wake-up call, end of the petrodollar. And basically, all it is, the only thing that we can find that's actually sourced is that China will issue a oil futures contract denominated in yuan. It has nothing to do with gold, has nothing to do with them backing the contract, has nothing to do with them converting it on the Shanghai Gold Exchange. There's no source for that. And then that story became, well, then the people who buy the yuan-denominated oils contract are going to then take the yuan and go buy gold. Okay. And then it was pointed out that, well, they can go on the COMEX and the LBMA and drain the West gold when they buy their gold. Well, you can't even use yuan to buy gold on the LBMA or COMEX. I'm not going to get into this story and why that story is a non-story. I'm pointing out that the real story in that area is that China is trying to internationalize the yuan. We put out a report earlier this week in a YouTube, a VidMe, a BitChute, talking about how it's going to take years and years and years to internationalize the yuan. So, what we have today, yesterday, zero hits. It's a huge story, China launching petro-yuan. Now, Tyler was very cautious to not make a big deal out of the gold backing, but he did mention it. It said, quote, "This means Russia as well as Iran and other key node of Asian integration may bypass U.S. sanctions by trading energy in their own contracts in yuan," which they're already doing. You don't need a oils yuan. That just facilitates it. A futures contract. Inbuilt in the move is a true Chinese win-win. Yuan, according to some, see, Tyler's clever, he says according to some, will be fully convertible into gold on both the Shanghai and Hong Kong exchanges. So he made his story not focus so much on the gold portion, but he does mention it, and that's what most people are focused on. But on the yuan denominated oil futures contract, which makes sense, and there's no reason to think that that's not going to happen. A couple of weeks ago, we reported that China was going to issue this $2 billion dollar-denominated bond. You can click on that and you can see it, and that was a couple of weeks ago. Even my own followers on Twitter, I asked, what will China do first? Issue dollar-denominated bonds or a gold-backed yuan? And more people seem to think that China's going to issue a gold-backed yuan. They're not. They have made no announcements to do so. Maybe someday in the future they might, but there's been no announcements that they're going to back the yuan. They're going to convert the oil futures contract into gold on the Shanghai Gold Exchange. And now many of the commentators have not just backpedaled, they've tried to say that all along what we meant was once this contract is in place, all these oil producers are going to go and buy gold elsewhere, and that's going to be a game changer and some kind of a wake-up call. So that's when you look at everything from a gold perspective. Now, if you're interested in more information on the gold-backed yuan and why the story is a complete farce, you can read my Here Comes the Gold-Backed Yuan Without the Gold. If you're interested in wanting to learn how that story then morphed, you can read The Curious Case of the Gold-Backed Yuan Story. Just got curiouser when we saw how the story morphed and morphed and morphed, just trying to keep the story alive. Well, the story is still alive and well. I don't think there's an alternative financial media outlet that has not only reported on the story, but is insisting that this is the big game changer. It's coming in 2 months. And of course, this is going to change everything in the world. And the other thing we've been pointing out for the last few weeks now is not only does the story not have a source, it doesn't make a stitch of sense for them to do it anyway. China is in a huge debt spiral right now. And even the People's Bank of China's governor said the other day that the financial system of China faces a Minsky moment because he has concerns about the levels of the country's debt. So the last thing China needs to do is get involved in any type of game changer wake-up call and try to upset the financial system by dethroning the dollar and internationalizing the yuan. That's not on the top of their list. It hasn't been mentioned by, and of course, when you say China hasn't mentioned it, read Sun Tzu. Why would they tell you? Okay. Anyway, if you want to believe in fantasies, you can believe in this gold-backed yuan story. Today we're reporting that in the actuality that China is issuing dollar-denominated bonds. According to Chinese officials, they will come out this week. And also, and here's the guy who's worried, the People's Bank of China governor. Surprised he was allowed to say what he said. And here's the other story. China's dumping treasuries. Game over for the dollar. China is not going to support the dollar anymore. Yeah, they're issuing gold. They're issuing dollar-denominated bonds, and they've added a huge amount of treasuries in the past 7 months. So China is firming up its dollar position. It doesn't look like they're out to crash the dollar, and we'll see what happens. But there is your snapshot as I see it right now. If you can show me a source as to China's intention to back the yuan with gold, I'd like to see it. We saw Mike Maloney try to call me out and say that there is a source, and he cites the Nikkei Asian Review story, which has no source. Remember, if you look at that story again, Nikkei Asian Review, China is expected shortly to launch a crude oil futures contract. That doesn't say China announced anything. It says they're expected to, priced in yuan and convertible into gold, and what analysts say could be a game changer. Directly out of Indonesia, this author has said that that's what's going to happen. China sees New World Order with oil benchmark backed by gold. And that is the basis for the story. Now, as I mentioned, some of the smarter analysts have backed away from that. So, well, that's not what it really means. It means they're going to take, the oil producers are going to take their yuan, they're going to go buy gold elsewhere. And that's the game changer. If you can see the implications, that's what's going to happen. All right, well, thank you very much for listening. We'll continue to follow this story. If you like these types of reports, please consider making a small or large donation. Very few people will actually see this video, will actually read this in terms of compared to I think 150,000 people have seen a Zero Hedge article on this huge story, the Mike Maloney video on the game changer for gold. I think 50,000 people have watched that. I think my YouTube, which was called Here Comes the Gold Back Yuan Without the Gold, got about 1,300 views. So if you're watching this, you're one of the few people who actually are seeing an alternative view. This is not alternative facts, as that woman that worked for Trump once said, Marianne Conway, I think that's her name. I'm just showing you that there are no sources for this story. There's just everyone getting all excited about a Nikkei Asian review story. They're changing the story. They're morphing the story. They're trying to make the story correct. And of course, it's all going to happen in 2 months. And in 2 months, when they do launch, if they do launch a yuan oil futures contract denominated in yuan, it'll be no big deal. No bigger than when 45 days until a sovereign-sized gold buy will shock the world, or imminent COMEX default, Shemitah, all these things that are on their way. They're going to crash the dollar, collapse the dollar, send gold skyrocketing, never happened before. We'll see at the end of the year, and we'll see where gold is. I'd like to see gold go higher, but it's not going to go higher because of this oil-denominated futures contract. And if it does, congratulations, but it's not because there's any truth to the story. Until I see China announce a gold-backed yuan gold convertible, there is no story. Thanks for listening.